when an unidentified child was found in a box washed up on the beach, her flashing light-up shoes were the most heartbreaking sight. Without a name, she was dubbed Grace, until a woman came into the police station exposing hours of horror that this 2-year-old had endured. But at least now, she has her name. You were such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, and today's case is about baby Grace and her identification and the whole process of figuring out who killed her and getting justice for her. Now, I also want to thank our sponsor who allows me to continue creating these videos for you, and today that is Home Design Makeover. Home Design Makeover is actually a free to download game which has match 3 puzzles where you can become a home renovator, where you can decorate, customize, basically fix up fixer-uppers for your clients. There are also characters in the game, Troy and Julia, who are your assistants, making this feel like one of those home makeover shows, especially because of their love story. You'll definitely be rooting for them to get together as more than just co-workers. You can create your perfect dream home, and for me, it makes it so much better than wanting to redecorate every single room that I have in real life. You don't have to spend money on the new decor. You can play this game. It has hundreds of rooms to design. So you're playing these match 3 puzzles to earn the coins to spend on the decor in the game. I'm currently designing a makeover for newlyweds and first-time homeowners, but Home Design Makeover is an amazing way to be creative while relaxing and see just what you can create. If you have the decorating bug like I do, you want to pretend that you are designing your own house, then you can download with a link down below for free or use the QR code on the screen. And if you want 1,000 free coins to start out, you can use the code BM1. So it was 2007 in Texas, and that October 29th, a container would wash up on a beach of Galveston Bay. Now, a local fisherman named Robert Spinn would come upon this upside-down blue plastic box, and he wondered if there was some fishing gear in it. So he headed over to it, he took a look inside, but as he turned over the bucket to have it right side up, he heard a thud and knew something wasn't right. And so when he carefully opened this up, inside there was a plastic bag, and he cut this open and he smelled something horrible. Robert's first thought was that it was someone's pet that they had put in this box, so he actually ripped it open with fishing pliers, and that is when he saw a little shoe. That's when he knew it was a person, and he called his wife and then immediately called 911 to tell them about the remains of this small child. Now, Chief of Police Jimmy Gillane was the first to arrive at the scene after that, and he opened the lid to the container himself, and he immediately saw flashing lights. Those were light-up kid shoes in that box, and he knew all about those kind of shoes because he had just bought his niece a pair not too long ago. But there were 2 trash bags inside of this bucket covering up whatever was inside. He opened them up further and could see the child's leg. The crime scene unit was then dispatched, and the Galveston Sheriff Detectives Mike Berry and Tommy Hansen were then there to receive the child's body from the boat when it came in. They ended up dubbing her Baby Grace so that she could have a name while they looked for her real one. At this point, they promised her they would find who did this and that they would take her home. Now, the Galveston County Medical Examiner's Office took the heartbreaking task of doing the autopsy, and even the detectives couldn't stomach watching this. Many of them left the room, but the local coroner would find that this was a blonde, blue-eyed girl. She was very small, and she had 3 fractures on her skull. It was said that these injuries were similar to falling off a rooftop. She was wearing Target brand clothes and those light up pink and white tennis shoes. Though baby Grace was already very decomposed, and it was theorized that she had actually been dead for some time prior to being tossed in the water and washing up on the shore. Detectives began to say that someone had tossed her out like trash. Now, forensic artist Lois Gibson was called in to create a sketch of this little girl due to the fact that she was so decomposed that she would have to do a reconstruction of her face in order to show the public for identification. So Lois had to go into this morgue and take pictures of her face, her clothes, and Lois said that baby Grace was decomposed, rotted, and horrific. But she drew a pair of cute eyes and smooth skin because she was also a baby. Lois also was so heartbroken at this sight because she had a child around the same age as baby Grace. So she had to push down her emotions to sketch this little girl in order to find her identity. She then sent in the pictures that were released nationwide, and this forever affected Lois. She had a nervous breakdown after this. Now, at a press conference, the sheriff's office announced this sketch and actually held up a pair of those pink and white light-up shoes, asking, "Who is baby Grace?" Her poster explained that she was likely 2 to 3 years old, 32 to 34 inches tall, 25 to 30 pounds, long blonde or light brown wavy hair, and was placed inside of a Sterilite 92-quart tote locker that was blue with black handles. They believe she could have been from anywhere in the country and dumped in the ocean. In fact, they even did a DNA test to make sure she wasn't Madeleine McCann who had gone missing. Now, 3 days after releasing this sketch on November 23rd, 2007, a month after baby Grace had been found, many tips were coming in, hundreds, one of which was a call, and this woman was from Ohio. She believes she knew baby Grace's identity. In fact, she said she was related to her. Cheryl would tell the police that she believed that the sketch resembled her granddaughter. Another tip was a woman who showed up at the police department with her lawyer asking to speak with them, but not clarifying what she wanted to speak about. And so they went into the interrogation room with her. She gave her name as Kimberly Trenner, and she began to tell the detectives that her husband's parents didn't know that her daughter was baby Grace. She explained that her husband, Royce Ziegler, was very aggressive with her daughter. Little did investigators know that these two tips of the grandmother and the mother were connected. The grandmother who had called in was the mother's mother. Now, the woman in the interrogation room said that her daughter was Riley Ann Sawyers, and for the next few hours, Kimberly gave police a horrific video statement.
Would you mind identifying yourself by name and date of birth, please?
Kimberly Trenner.
How long have you been in Texas?
First came down the end of May.
Of this year?
Of this year, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was here for a week and had to go back up to Ohio for a couple days, and then I moved down the beginning of June. I'm married to Royce Ziegler.
Okay.
The second.
Had you ever seen him spank her?
Yes. I mean, he really kind of tried to stay out of it at first. When we went to that realtor about the new house, that's when it really started with him. And I mean,
What really started with him?
we need to discipline Riley.
Okay.
In this, she was very emotional, but detectives would later say they thought that it was more remorse for being caught than remorse for her daughter being missing. You see, they didn't know if this was true about Riley Ann being baby Grace, but they did know that there was now a confession that a little girl was missing by 2 of her family members. And so it turned out that this little girl, Riley Ann Sawyers, had been missing for months and never reported missing. Riley Ann was born to Kimberly Trenner and Robert Sawyers when Kimberly was actually only 15 and still in high school. Now, Robert was said to be a bit older, but still in high school as well at this time. But by the time that Riley was born, her parents were separated, and Riley's grandmother was doing the brunt work of taking care of her. However, the mother and father of Riley, as well as the mother's mother, so her grandmother, all continued to live together during this time. This would change, though, in October of 2006, so a year prior to baby Grace being found. That month, Robert Sawyers, who had begun dating someone else, had a domestic violence charge filed against him from Kimberly. He moved out, moved on, and this was said to be reduced to disorderly conduct, and Robert said that the charge stemmed from an argument that was blown way out of proportion. But at this point, Kimberly had custody of the baby while he was trying to fight for it. 7 months later, in May of 2007, Kimberly took Riley and they moved to Texas. Within the month, she was actually married to another man named Royce Clyde Ziegler. They had met while playing World of Warcraft online. It said that they actually could have met while she was still with this other man, but 4 months after they were married, baby Grace was found deceased in the container, and now 2 family members were alleging that that was Riley. So Riley's grandmother and her biological father, Robert, were in the news demanding justice. Her biological father said that he was so stressed, and her grandmother, Cheryl, said that she had called local police who were in Texas where Kimberly had moved for a local welfare check for Riley prior to all of this to make sure she was okay. This was in July of 2007. But she said that when they got there, Riley wasn't there, and her mom, Kimberly, and her now stepfather, Royce, had a letter from Child Protective Services explaining that Riley had actually been taken away from them and placed into foster care, so she was no longer in their care. Seeing this note, they took that as evidence and left. But at this time, investigators announced that they were fairly confident that the little girl they found in the container was this missing child. But the next step was the DNA test. Now, detectives actually received 8 samples from 8 different families to do these tests because there were 8 different families of missing children who resembled baby Grace who believed this could be their daughter. However, a press conference would then announce that 19-year-old Kimberly Trenner and 24-year-old Royce Ziegler were arrested on charges of injuring a child and tampering with evidence of their daughter, Riley Ann. Each were given a $350,000 bond. You see, Riley's biological father, Robert, had given the DNA for those tests, and he said in an interview that he did not believe Kimberly was capable of harming Riley, that he didn't think that Riley could be baby Grace, that her mother loved her. He said, "You can't not love that little girl the first time you see her. You know, it's heart-wrenching to think she might have done this to such a beautiful little girl." But while he was in denial, his ex-wife, ex-girlfriend, the mother of his child, and her new husband were being arrested. Now, the affidavit that was filed at the time of their arrest described the statements made by Kimberly when she came into the police station that led to these charges. You see, Kimberly had said that her husband, Royce, wasn't happy with Riley's behavior at 2 years old and thought she was too wild, that his discipline began to get much more aggressive. Kimberly said that if her 2-year-old didn't say sir, ma'am, please, and thank you, she would be beaten. And Royce often didn't think she did it right or did it hard enough, so he did it himself.
He said, okay, the next time she screams, we're going to take her into the bathtub. And of course she's going to scream the way he was hitting her with that belt. And when she would scream, he would take her and shove her into the water.
She confessed that 3 months before baby Grace had been found, Riley Ann had died. This was July 24th of 2007, and that day Royce had actually stayed home from his job because he believed that Riley needed discipline and that Kimberly wouldn't do it right. So he would discipline her by using leather belts and sitting her in a bathtub full of cold water. And she screamed due to being hit, and when she screamed, he would dunk her head underwater. He then would pick her up by her hair and throw her across the room, and one of those times her head slammed against the tile. She was then ordered to stand back up and was unable to do so, and she died that day. But Kimberly claimed it was accidental and a case of discipline that had gone too far. But the affidavit also described Royce Ziegler's interrogation prior to his arrest, and he denied knowing anything. He said he told them everything, and the detective straight up said, "No, we've got a dead baby here."
Kimberly, that's your wife, correct?
Yes, sir.
How'd you get along with Riley?
We got on good.
You ever spanked her?
No, sir.
Never spanked her.
Not that I remember.
Royce, we've been doing good. We've been doing good so far. Everything's been rock and roll pretty good. Don't lie to us.
I'm not lying. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Well, yes, you are.
That is when Royce began to say that Child Protective Services took Riley all of those months ago. Now, it was found that there were documents citing that Riley had been removed from their custody due to alleged sexual abuse of Riley. But during Royce's next interview, he would change his story. He claimed that he knew Riley was dead that day, but that he was in a different room. He began painting the narrative that his wife Kimberly killed her.
And the thing is, it's not my nature to hurt children. I never planned on it, and I wasn't in the room the day when all that stuff was going on.
Do you know how she died?
I wasn't even in the room. All I remember is I heard my name called out that day. I ran in there, saw Riley on the floor, purple.
Now, the detective speaking to him, Detective Hansen, believed that he was only interested in protecting himself because he seemed to have a really good memory about what had happened until the moment of her death, where he suddenly said he blacked out. He could not remember anything. At this point, though, this was simply an investigation into this missing girl, Riley Ann, and evidence against her parents that would lead to a conviction, because it was believed that these parents had killed their daughter, and they might have her body or they might not. They didn't know about the DNA test at this point. They had not come back. And so that's when they headed to Kimberly and Royce's home, and they found a notebook that listed out rules for Riley. And also there was a note from Royce that said, "My heart is black dead. There is nothing left." So they dug deeper, and the family computer was brought in for evidence. And on this computer, searches were done of disposing of bodies, burial sites, and cleaning up crime scenes. Then, that letter from CPS was found where Riley had been taken away, proof of this. However, this letter had also been made on that very computer. This had been forged in order to pass the welfare check, when the family members began to question where Riley was. Child Protective Services had no history, no record of Riley Ann Sawyers. But also on this computer were suicide notes from both Royce and Kimberly. Around the time of the arrest, Royce had actually overdosed on blood pressure and antidepressant pills, and he wrote a note saying, "I leave my property to Kimberly Ziegler. I take my own life because of the guilt for past sins, which I had confessed before I took my life. My wife is innocent. Also, my family can go burn in hell for their stress they have caused. Here I take my own life." Kimberly said she couldn't live with herself after her child had died. Now, all of this combined is what led to their arrest for their missing daughter, Riley Ann, but the question remained, was Riley Ann baby Grace? Did they have her body? On November 30th of 2007, the results of the DNA test would come in, and they would finally reveal that baby Grace was in fact Riley Ann Sawyers. Royce and Kimberly had been found to go to Walmart the day of Riley's murder, thought to be after she had passed, to buy bleach, a shovel, latex gloves, and a plastic storage container. When their arrests were made public, a man called in to say that he worked for Geek Squad and he had once come to work on the family's computer. And when he went by the garage, the shed area, he smelled something horrible, something decaying, but he never said anything. He didn't know what it was. Now, Royce's stepmother then came forward to explain that Royce kind of had a bad childhood, that his father would beat him in the same manner that they were alleging they beat Riley Ann. However, we've discussed many times, that doesn't equal a reason to do the same to your own kid. But while awaiting trial in 2008, Kimberly gave birth to her and Royce's first child together. It was a little boy named Sean who was given to Kimberly's family. The DA then decided not to seek the death penalty because the state appeals court said it wasn't appropriate for cases involving parents where they were accused of killing their children, and also that they feared they would be unable to prove that these two would be a further danger in the future. But Riley's family did agree that it was fine that they didn't get the death penalty because they wanted them to spend the rest of their lives in prison thinking about Riley. They were both being tried for capital murder, and Riley's funeral had pink balloons all over and a video of Riley's home videos where you could see her being just an adorable little 2-year-old. 200 people were in attendance, and 2 of the deputies who actually worked on her case were her pallbearers. They really cared about this little girl. Riley had been cremated, and so inside of her casket was a stuffed Elmo, which was her favorite stuffed animal, and a pink dress. But even in different countries at this time, everyone knew Riley Riley's name. They had known baby Grace, and they were so happy to know her real name, Riley Ann Sawyers. Her grandfather said that the show of affection from people all over the world was helping the family heal. He said, "She's no longer just our baby. She's the world's baby." Kimberly's trial was first, and this was in 2009 after she had her baby, and the prosecution said that Kimberly was a willing participant in the death, that she knew the beating could lead to death and she did not stop it, that she was a cold-blooded liar who ignored her daughter's pleas to stop the abuse. We will get into exactly what that means in a little bit. But the defense said that neither of these parents foresaw that Riley could die. It just had spun out of control. They then began painting a picture that Kimberly's previous boyfriend, Riley's father, was super abusive to her, assaulted her, and so Kimberly met Royce and thought Royce was a knight in shining armor. An investigator then took the stand and said that Royce and Kimberly were both blaming each other. It was common for couples to do so, and their lawyers were denying the other's version of events, of course. And so the DA then said that he was only able to find one lie in Kimberly's 3-hour-long statement. And this was that CPS letter where she said CPS had taken Riley and they found that the letter was forged. Now, the letter was said to be written at a time when Royce was out of town, though Kimberly said she wrote it, but Royce had forced her to write it to cover it up. Now, a witness then testified that 2 weeks after the alleged murder, that Royce and Kimberly were at a company picnic for Royce's job, and that they seemed happy and playful. She even brought in photos where Kimberly was just smiling. They didn't appear to be mourning or sad or scared of being caught at all. But the jurors would hear more in detail about the day of the murder, and they had heard that the beatings had happened in Riley's room, and then they went into the living room. But while Royce and Riley were in her room, her face was shoved into a pillow and she was beaten. But Royce wasn't the only one participating in the abuse, because Kimberly herself admitted that Royce told her that they needed to break Riley to get her behavior to be better, and that they needed to shove her head underwater. And so Kimberly did. When they were using the belt on Riley, she had attempted to escape, but they would put the belt around her and pull her back in. Royce also allegedly bit Riley on the hand. But the most horrific part was this 2-year-old baby who had done everything in her power to get this to stop. She looked up at her mom and she said, "I love you," as she was being killed.
She tried to get Riley to stand up and her legs kept crumbling. And she knew then. And the last words that Riley said was,
"I love you, Mom."
"I love you, Mommy." That's a quote from the mother.
However, this did cause Kimberly to stop, but Royce said that Riley was just manipulating her. So they continued. And when she could no longer stand, that's when they finally decided they should give her some medicine. Now, Riley hated medicine. That's one of the reasons she would actually get in trouble, is because she didn't like the taste of that child liquid medicine. And so she would refuse to take it. She often fought it off. But during this time, she was begging them to give it to her because she believed this would make them stop. Unfortunately, she could barely swallow it. She couldn't get it down, and that's when Kimberly realized something was wrong. So she tried to call 911, and Royce told her they would go to jail, and that's when she stopped breathing. Royce allegedly tried CPR, and then when Riley was turning cold, handed her to her mother. When Royce and Kimberly realized that she was dead, they covered her in a purple towel and they ran to Walmart for supplies. They then washed Riley's body with bleach and they poured some down her throat to get rid of any DNA before wrapping her in garbage bags and stuffing her in this small container. Now, Royce had actually worked at a funeral home, and so he knew what to do to destroy evidence. But they didn't throw her in this ocean right away. They actually hid her in their storage shed for about 2 months, which is how the Geek Squad member had smelt that horrific decaying odor. 2 months later, Royce was going to bury her body, but then failed, so then Kimberly drove him to the bridge near the Galveston Causeway and ended up dumping her into Galveston Bay. But then Royce was panicking, watching it, saying that he should have drilled holes in it so it would sink because it was going to wash up. And thank God it did. A month later, the container washed up on the beach, and now this little girl had justice. As they heard this videotape, the jurors began to weep. Because if you think it's difficult to listen to me repeating this, imagine listening to this from the mother who was there confessing doing this to their own child. On February 2nd, 2009, Kimberly Trenner was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. But then it was time for Royce Ziegler's trial. And on November 6th of 2009, he was found guilty of capital murder and evidence tampering and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole as well. He had zero reaction, but his mother was in the courtroom and she pleaded, "I just want to see him for a minute," as he was being taken away. His lawyer would later say, though, that Royce was devastated by this verdict, that he had been demonized by the media, that he wasn't this bad guy, because the media had been saying this was mostly done by Royce. And Kimberly had been there and hadn't stopped it. But the lawyer was saying that Royce was saying that when the real story was published, that they wouldn't question who was the one who was responsible and that Kimberly acted alone. Now, no further evidence to support this has come out that I could find since then. Riley's grandmother, Cheryl, who was the first one to send in that tip, said that she wished that it never happened.
Never a question whether or not I would be here, obviously. I had to be here because I was the only one who could be her voice now.
Is hearing that verdict going to bring you any comfort?
I don't know, comfort, I'm glad it's over. I'm glad it's over and now I can try to move on.
Chief of Police Jimmy Gillane, who was so involved in this case, said that Riley must have wanted them to find her, whether it was Riley or God or the universe, because it was so odd for her to have floated those 5 miles through all of these boats to this island where this fisherman just happened to see her. That island is now called Riley's Island, and across was the place where her remains were found. This baby girl deserves all of the attention in the world, all of the justice, and to be remembered. And the fact that these investigators cared so much from the beginning, giving her a name so she wasn't just Jane Doe, making sure that baby Grace was known as someone who was so little, so innocent, and a beautiful life that had been taken, and they were determined to get justice. And then they followed through with this and got justice for her and got the sentence. I truly commend them, and I know that it's oftentimes that we see the police didn't do anything. There was no investigation, and that's why we're left with no answers. And thankfully in this case, that didn't happen. Because for this little girl to look up at the people abusing her and tell them, "I love you," whether she was saying that so they stopped, whether she was saying that because she still loved them through the abuse, whether she was saying that because she knew she was gonna die, every possibility is just as horrific. Every possibility should not have happened. Baby Grace, Riley Ann Sawyers, you are loved. Your mom and stepfather did not show you that love. But I hope that now that you have passed and gotten justice, that so many people all over the world can give you that love and can think about you. And if you guys down below feel the urge to, I would love to see comments saying we love you, baby Grace, or anything to that effect, because she had so much love to give and so little given to her. That poor little girl could have had a life with her grandmother, with her biological father, even in Child Protective Services, which is not the best option for children. There were options other than killing her for not saying yes sir, yes ma'am, and being a typical 2-year-old who has tantrums and is a toddler, practically a baby. Who do you think was really involved most in the abuse? Do you think that Kimberly was just as involved as Royce? Do you think she was playing along? she was forced to do so? Do you think it was just Royce? Do you think she did have remorse since she came in to the police before she was even caught? Do you think she knew that her mother was calling and that's why she came in, because she knew she was already caught? Either way, I'm so glad that this case lined up in the way that it did after Riley had passed. I wish that it could have been prevented, but it's the best possible outcome for what did happen. So don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye. Also, don't forget to download Home Design Makeover if you would like to play for free. Click the link below.